In the high-stakes theater of American power, timing is never an accident. It is a weapon. For 40 days, a calculated silence had descended over the most toxic association in modern political history. The names Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein had been successfully decoupled in the public consciousness, buried under the chaotic debris of a looming war with Iran and the relentless churn of the 24-hour news cycle. The White House had clamped down on the Epstein files with a cold, bureaucratic alacrity, showing more concern for the preservation of secrets than for the restoration of justice for victims of systemic sexual predation. The administration's message was clear: move on, look away, the Epstein chapter is closed. Then, at 2:30 p.m. today, Melania Trump stepped out from the shadows of the East Wing and set the script on fire. By summoning the White House press pool for a sudden televised statement, the First Lady didn't just break her silence, she performed a strategic exhumation. With a cold, clinical fury, she addressed allegations that most of the mainstream public hadn't even heard yet. The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today, she declared. It was a moment of profound cognitive dissonance. While the president was reportedly sequestered in war meetings regarding the escalating conflict with Tehran, his wife was occupying the Klieg lights to litigate her social calendar from the 1990s. Why now? Why would the First Lady choose a moment of national security crisis to drag the most sordid scandal of the decade back into the center of the Oval Office? This isn't just a personal defense. It is a rupture in the unified front of the Trump communications machine. For years, the strategy regarding Epstein has been deny and deflect. Melania has opted for confront and magnify by declaring herself not a victim and not a witness. She has inadvertently validated the very questions the administration has spent months trying to suppress. In the world of political strategy, there is a concept known as the Streisand effect, where the act of suppressing information only serves to highlight it. Melania Trump didn't just defend her reputation today. She re-indexed every dark corner of the Epstein-Trump nexus for a global audience. She spoke of casual correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell and overlapping social circles in Palm Beach, using language that attempted to normalize the abnormal. But in doing so, she reminded us all that the halls of power are often connected by very short, very dark hallways. Is this a woman protecting her dignity, or is it a calculated maneuver to distance herself from a sinking ship? As the drums of war beat in the Situation Room, the First Lady has chosen to talk about sex trafficking, private planes, and the ethical bankruptcy of her accusers. The timing is so bizarre it borders on the surreal, suggesting that behind the scenes, a much larger legal or political dam is about to burst. We are witnessing a breakdown of the official narrative, where the private anxieties of the First Family are beginning to bleed into the public business of the state. The ghost of Jeffrey Epstein has returned to the White House, and this time it was invited in by the one person no one expected. To understand the gravity of Melania Trump's sudden intervention, one must look at the landscape of Washington, D.C. at this exact hour. The United States is on a knife edge, teetering on the brink of an all-out kinetic conflict with Iran. This is the fog of war that typically provides the perfect cover for domestic scandals to be buried. Usually, when a president is leading a nation toward a military confrontation, every member of the administration, especially the First Lady, is expected to project an image of stoic, unified resolve. Instead, we see a radical divergence. On the North Lawn, reporters are scrambling to reconcile two completely different realities. In one reality, Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief, focused on tactical briefings and regional stability in the Middle East. In the other, he is a man haunted by his past, whose wife feels compelled to publicly deny being a participant in a child sex trafficking ring. The political context here is one of extreme volatility. For months, the House Oversight Committee and Democratic leaders like Robert Garcia have been screaming into a void, demanding the release of FBI transcripts and victim statements related to the Epstein investigation. They were told the investigation was a hoax, a closed chapter, and a distraction. Just 24 hours ago, the acting Attorney General effectively signaled that the Department of Justice was mothballing the Epstein probe. The gates were locked, the victims were silenced, the status quo was preserved. And then Melania Trump demanded a public hearing. This is a sea change, to use the words of veteran correspondents. By calling for a hearing centered around Epstein survivors, Melania Trump has effectively crossed the picket line of her husband's own legal defense. She has validated the very mechanism of oversight that the president has labeled a partisan witch hunt. This creates a fascinating psychological and political fracture. If the president's own wife is calling for the survivors to be heard, how can the administration continue to claim that the investigation has no merit? We must also consider the psychological pressure of the New York social circle BIK Intendente. Melania's defense relied heavily on the idea that in the world of the ultra-wealthy, overlapping with monsters is just a byproduct of high society. She described her interaction with Ghislaine Maxwell as casual correspondence and a tribal note. This is the language of the elite in attempt to frame proximity to evil as a mere geographical coincidence. However, the socio-economic reality is that these circles are not accidental, they are curated. The Pound Beach and Manhattan scenes she referenced were the hunting grounds for Epstein, and the Trump brand was inextricably linked to that world for decades. The economic and social fallout of this statement cannot be overstated. It signals to the DOJ and to Congress that the Epstein matter is not settled law within the White House. It suggests that there are unsubstantiated reports, or perhaps even impending legal documents missing FBI transcripts that have the First Lady spooked. In the world of high-level politics, people do not hold press conferences to deny crimes they haven't been accused of unless they know an accusation is coming. By thrusting herself into the center of the story, Melania has stripped away the protection of the war with Iran headline. She has forced the American public to look at the moral rot that continues to fester beneath the surface of the administration. This isn't just about a socialite's reputation. It's about the integrity of the justice system. When the First Lady breaks ranks to demand transparency that her husband has denied, it suggests that the power dynamics inside the White House are far more fractured than the public has been led to believe. The moving on phase is over. The reckoning phase has just been restarted by the most unlikely of catalysts. If we look deeply into the structure of this press conference, we find a crisis management model that is bizarre, if not politically suicidal. Typically, in an administration operating under ironclad discipline, every message from the First Lady serves as a tributary to the president's main narrative. But today, Melania Trump chose a path of total divergence. Donald Trump said, "The country needs to move on." Melania Trump said, "Stop and look at me." This is a model strategic analysts call intentional decoupling, or perhaps it reveals a genuine internal panic. Let us analyze its efficacy. If Melania's goal was to protect her reputation, the action achieved the opposite. It backfired. She thrust herself into the eye of a storm that, only hours prior, the public had largely ignored in favor of Situation Room reports regarding Iran. By denying allegations that had never been officially made, she inadvertently created a checklist for investigators: flights on the Lolita Express, visits to the private island, and the depth of her ties to Ghislaine Maxwell. In terms of political economy, this event creates a subterranean instability among Trump's allies. Why would an administration that holds the keys to the Department of Justice allow a family member to demand a public hearing? This reveals a glaring hole in the White House's defensive perimeter. It suggests that the Epstein files, which this administration has refused to release with any sense of urgency or compassion for the victims, may contain sparks that even the First Lady is starting to feel the heat from. Analyzing the psychology of power further, Melania's denial does not carry the tone of a politician, but of an individual attempting to segregate reputational assets. In finance, when a subsidiary knows the parent company is about to collapse under a scandal, they seek to declare legal independence. Melania's insistence that she met her husband by chance in 1,998 inches and that Epstein did not introduce them is a frantic attempt to sever the umbilical cord between the rise of the Trump empire and Epstein's dark network. But is it effective? The answer is a resounding no. In the eyes of the public and opposition analysts, this act is akin to lighting a flare in the middle of the night to announce you aren't involved in the fire. It completely shatters Donald Trump's effort to label the Epstein investigation a hoax. You cannot call a case a hoax when your own wife is calling for victims to be heard in a public forum. This is a direct counter-argument to the president's legal strategy, creating a massive opening for House oversight committees, led by figures like Robert Garcia, to exploit. We live in an era where the truth is no longer a fixed entity but a product of repetition. Melania Trump's plea to be cautious about what you believe is a statement dripping with irony in the modern political landscape. It reflects a society fractured by unverified information streams, yet simultaneously it exposes the double standards of those in power. Look at how this administration handles information. When detailed reports regarding Situation Room decisions in the lead-up to a potential war with Iran are published, The president immediately attacks the reporters, calling them enemies of the people. Yet, when the First Lady faces rumors on social media, she doesn't just attack the sources, she creates a national platform to amplify them. This is a reflection of a political culture that prioritizes personal grievance over national destiny. Comparing this to historical precedents, we rarely see a First Lady break the White House's media firewall while the nation prepares for war. Even during the height of Watergate or the Clinton scandals, the spouses typically acted as a stabilizing anchor or maintained a tactical silence. Melania, conversely, has chosen to be an unpredictable variable. What is the societal impact here? It sets a dangerous precedent for using national tools like the White House press pool to litigate private legal and personal anxieties. While millions of Americans worry about gas prices, the stability of financial markets, and the lives of soldiers overseas, the nation's attention is being dragged back to parties in Palm Beach and Manhattan from 2 decades ago. This is the failure of the reality interpretation strategy. While 80% of the facts involve unreleased investigative reports, Melania's 20% creative intervention has turned it into a psychological thriller. Her efforts to dismiss the mean-spirited and unethical nature of her accusers actually mirror the lack of standards in how this administration has treated the actual victims of Epstein. The contrast between the cries for help from young girls in sealed FBI files and Melania's aristocratic defense creates an unbridgeable social chasm. We are witnessing a power model where the protection of a personal brand is placed higher than the execution of community justice. Ultimately, Melania Trump's sudden press conference leaves us with a philosophical question rather than a political answer. Can we ever truly escape the ghosts of the past? Or are we simply trying to build higher walls to hide them? Her assertion that "I am not Epstein's victim" is a declaration of independence, but it is also a reminder that within the web of power and money, no one is truly a bystander. The silence of Donald Trump, who abruptly hung up on reporters when asked about his wife, speaks louder than any official statement. It is the silence of a man who realizes that the narrative is slipping through his fingers. Melania's actions today were not a media victory. They were a crack in the unity of the Trump family, a crack in the strategy to bury the Epstein case, and a crack in the public's belief that the government is prioritizing what matters most. When the First Lady steps into the light to deny a crime she hasn't been charged with, she inadvertently admits that the shadow is still lurking in the hallways of the White House. The warning here is clear. Systems of power can delay justice, they can seal FBI files, and they can divert public attention toward war and conflict. But truth has a strange way of finding its way to the surface, often through the very people trying hardest to bury it. Melania Trump has asked for a hearing, and perhaps that is the only thing she and her detractors can agree on. We began this day with news of an impending war in the Middle East, but we end it with another war at the very heart of American power. A war for truth, for reputation, and for the salvation of those forgotten in the Epstein files. The script has been rewritten, and the pen is no longer held by the president's media consultants, but by a woman who decided she would no longer be a supporting character in her husband's drama. But be careful what you ask for, because when the Klieg lights are truly turned on in a public hearing for the victims, they will not only illuminate the perpetrators, they will shine on everyone who ever stood in the same room, attended the same party, and remained silent for far too many years. Today's performance ends, but the darkest chapter of the Epstein files may have only just begun to turn.